Buongiorno a tutti, ben ritrovati a stretto giro dopo il webinar di settimana scorsa. Oggi con l'ente, con l'NPC, abbiamo il piacere di andare nei parchi del Nord-Est. Avremo con noi come al solito Donald, avremo due ranger come al solito che ci daranno spiegazioni un pochettino più dettagliate. Abbiamo Dana e Clary. Adesso parleremo un po' in inglese giusto per fare una reintroduzione. Come al solito faremo un'introduzione di Donald sui metodi di approccio e di comunicazioni generali che facciamo sempre per, diciamo, per tutti quelli che non hanno appunto avuto modo di avere queste informazioni generali nelle sessioni precedenti. Quindi adesso parleremo appunto in inglese e passeremo la parola a Donald. So welcome back, Donald. Thank you very much again for attending this webinar. This should be, we are nearly at the end of the sessions. This is, I think, not the last, but nearly the last. So where are you going to be taking us today? So I will just pass the line to you. Then you can just pilot Clary and Dana. Thank you, Donald. You go.
Thank you. Good afternoon again. Hello, everybody. Thank you for continuing to check out our presentations about national parks of the different regions of the United States. I'm sure we have many repeat visitors, and we have one more session left to go. And today, I'm very happy my colleagues Dana and Claire will be presenting with me about national parks of the Northeast region of the United States. And I want to thank Dana and Claire and also all of you. As you know, we had to reschedule this session from its previous date and time because of my mistake about the time zone differences between the East Coast and Italy. So Dana and Claire, thank you for hanging in and being part of being flexible to reschedule here. We are going to show you national parks in the northeastern part of the United States. And this is actually one of my favorite regions of the United States. I love the big cities of the Northeast, the metropolitan areas of Boston and New York and Philadelphia and Baltimore and Washington, D.C. And you may not think in the Northeast there would be a lot of national parks, but there are. There are a plethora of national park units across the Northeast United States. There's a lot of rich history, US history, heritage, and culture in the Northeast. Important battles have been fought in the Northeast, especially around American independence and the War of 1812. There were Civil War battle sites. Important founding moments at the founding of the United States of America as a country in the Northeast, of course. And then there are really great landscapes, ecosystems, mountains, the Blue Ridge and Appalachian Mountains, so much to explore from the Atlantic Ocean inland a little bit. So we're going to dive into the Northeast. For my section here of slides, I'm going to be very quick because I think a lot of you have been watching these series. I don't want to repeat, but just to say again that we always encourage you as travel facilitators and packagers and planners to keep in mind how big and diverse the national park system is. With so many units to explore, you can always incorporate parks into every trip. And so we're going to show you in the Northeast specifically that variety of parks that can be incorporated into a trip in the United States with the variety of activities and things to explore across this system. So you've seen this slide before, so just always remember just how much opportunity there is. Again, just on entry fees, most of our parks are free, which is what makes them such a great bargain for incorporating into your trip in the United States. And remember, we do have that annual pass available for your customers and clients. The easiest thing to do is to purchase that pass at the first park they visit, where they have to pay an entry fee. That pass will be for sale there and is good for a year. Only $80, a real bargain if you're visiting several parks that charge entrance fees. Now this you have on the slide deck, you can download. So you've heard me talk about this before. I won't repeat it here. If you're looking to plan accommodation, lodging, or camping, or activities for your customers and your clients, you have to research the individual park. They vary widely according to what is available at the different parks. Just depends on the type of park, the specific activities that are available there. So some research on your end through nps.gov, the website, you'll quickly see all of the options for individual parks in terms of different visitor services. So just a reminder about that. And then finally, again, I have to say it every single time because it's so important to plan your park visit. Just last week, I was talking to my sister, a friend of my sister's, who wants to take her family on a road trip to some national parks next month. They want to visit Grand Canyon and Yellowstone and Mount Rushmore. They had not started any planning at all. And I told her it's going to be very difficult to find your lodging too. Some of those parks, as you know, are using reservation systems this year. It's so important to do your planning ahead of time so you have your schedule, your itinerary, and we have a lot of great resources available for that planning. Finally, and again, I have to reiterate, we need your help in keeping visitors safe, in keeping the resources, the animals, the ecosystems, and the landscapes protected in our national parks. So any messages you can deliver about staying away from animals, being safe, taking your trash out, leave no trace is really important. We always appreciate the help of travel facilitators and packagers like yourself in delivering those messages. But that's all from me because most of you have heard that before. I want to really focus on the regional focus of today, which is the Northeast United States and the many, many national park sites that are here in the Northeast. So to start the next section of the presentation, my colleague Dana will be taking over. And with that, yeah, let me just hand it over right to you, Dana, and I'm on slide duty, so I'll be ready for that.
Okay, fantastic. Well, welcome everyone. It's nice to meet you. Again, my name is Dana Dirks, and I work at a national park right in the heart of Washington, D.C. So I look forward to sharing with you more about our sites. In this section of the program, we'll be highlighting Washington, D.C. and the National Mall, Civil War forts and national battlefields, Shenandoah National Park, parks of New England, Revolutionary War forts and battlefields, the national parks of Boston, and Acadia National Park. And so we have a lot to share with you in a very short period of time, but we'll do our best. So in this area of the country, there are lots of different airports that you can fly into. Many of you may already be aware of that based upon travel that you've arranged in the past for visitors. We're just highlighting a few on this map, but you can see there are many more. There's Washington Dulles Airport, there's John F. Kennedy Airport, Boston, and also just in the DC metro area alone, where we're going to focus next, we do have Reagan National, Washington National, and we do have Baltimore, Washington International Airports. So if you'd like to go ahead to the next slide. And again, in this section, we're going to focus in on Washington, D.C., which you can see circled on the map in yellow. Next slide. So we're going to start with some of the sites that you know perhaps a lot about. If you have arranged travel for Washington, D.C. in the past, which seems highly likely, you might be familiar with the Washington Monument and Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial. The Washington Monument is dedicated to the first president of the United States, George Washington. This tall obelisk or tower, essentially a tower, is 555 feet tall. And so it's fairly large for the city of Washington, D.C. And it's beautiful and it overlooks the city as well. And the Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial is dedicated to someone who fought for equal rights for all. And so that's definitely one of the most beautiful icons within the city of Washington, D.C. And of course, very meaningful. Next slide. We do have lots of other sites, which again, you may be familiar with. We have the Jefferson Memorial, which is dedicated to the author of the Declaration of Independence. That's a document that's really important to the founding of the United States. And he definitely was a countryman and a leader within our country as well. He was also a visionary. He was among the first to plan the United States as a country. In addition, we do have the World War II Memorial, which you see pictured here. And this honors those who have died and those who were in service in helping to fight for freedom and equality for people all over the world, not just for the United States. Next slide. This is the Lincoln Memorial. And President Lincoln led us through the bulk of the Civil War. Again, the fight for freedom within the United States, freedom for people, for example, who were enslaved, and also changes to the economy as a result of those efforts as well. He served as president from 1861 to 1865 until he was assassinated. But as you can also see from this memorial, you can see that it's in a very picturesque and beautiful section of Washington, D.C. Just beautiful. It has gorgeous views of the area. It really is something that honors this person and their contributions to the United States. Next slide. In this particular location, this is part of the Franklin Delano Roosevelt Memorial. And Franklin Delano Roosevelt ushered us into World War II. And he was an amazing figure within the United States. He also dealt with a lot of things that helped change the American economy, special projects that he tried out that helped to engage the public. One of those projects was the Civilian Conservation Corps. And I have to tell you, my grandfather was part of these camps for young men all across the United States called Civilian Conservation Corps camps, where young men earned a wage, and they sent, of the amount of money that they made, they sent most of it back to their families. But they also worked on different projects, and those projects also were within national parks and national forests and state parks and state forests to build trails and roads and all different kinds of things. And that was just one of the many projects and programs that came through in the time period when Franklin Delano Roosevelt was connected to the United States. So on to the next slide. Now, Frederick Douglass, this is one of the sites that you may know very little about. This actually is a site that's dedicated to an African American man who used to be enslaved and who escaped at a very young age. And he became a leading advocate, a leader in helping to promote rights for all and equality for all. And this is one of the locations that you can visit in Washington, D.C. It's a beautiful location. It's set up on top of a hill. And this is a location that honors Frederick Douglass and his history. Next slide. Kenilworth Aquatic Gardens. This is another one you might not know much about, but I don't know, when I travel personally, I oftentimes find that I enjoy cities and I enjoy the things that I can learn, but I also happen to need a nature break. And I think that that's true for lots of different people, not just for someone who's a park ranger, but essentially something that gives me an opportunity to connect with nature and to do something slightly different along the way of my trips or vacations or my time to play. And so the Kenilworth Aquatic Gardens is certainly a beautiful place. They have blooming lilies and blooming lotus flowers, depending upon the time of the year that people visit. In fact, there's an entire festival that's devoted to lilies and lotus flowers, and that's here at this particular park. Any time of the year, though, you can see lots of different wildlife and other flowers and beautiful trees, and it's just a really lovely setting to find some peace in the city. Next slide. Another park, this is one that's dear to my heart. I work at Rock Creek Park in Washington, D.C. And I have to tell you, this is America's oldest urban national park. It was established in 1890, and it was America's third oldest national park. In fact, the legislation, the law that created this park is actually very similar to Sequoia National Park, which was the second national park, and also Yosemite National Park, which was tied for the fourth oldest national park. And so even in the heart of Washington, D.C., visitors can take a hike and see beautiful wildlife and see flowers and trees and all different kinds of things. You can even ride a horse in this park in the heart of Washington, D.C. Next slide. So just a quick overview before we go into the next section. I've worked in Washington, D.C. now for, wow, 4 times, I guess. And I've worked in Washington, D.C. for more than half of my career. So many of the sites that we just talked about are ones that are all near and dear to my heart. I love this area. I think visitors get a lot out of visiting the Washington, D.C. area. And then they also get a lot out of visiting these next areas, which kind of go a little further out from the city itself. And so in this area, we'll talk about the Civil War defenses of Washington. And so if you imagine where you see the section of Washington, D.C. off to the top right of the map, there was a circle of forts that surrounded the city during the Civil War. And that circle of forts was meant to protect the capital city. And so this would have been 1861 to 1865. So that's what we call the Civil War defenses of Washington. In addition, we have other sites, other Civil War sites that are outside of the city of Washington, D.C. In fact, they include Manassas National Battlefield, Antietam, Monocacy, Fredericksburg and Spotsylvania, and Gettysburg area. And so they are really a very short drive away from the city. As you can see, drive times, and then we're going to cover a little bit about Shenandoah National Park. I mean, Shenandoah National Park is not very far from Washington, D.C., 66 miles, depending upon which part of the area you're going to. Just to get to the edge of Shenandoah National Park is just 66 miles. So you can see, if you drive to Shenandoah National Park, you're within about a 2-hour, you're within a less than 2 hour, really 66 miles is next to nothing. As far as the drive, you can get there within about, it depends upon where you're coming from. So anyway, long and short, 1 to 2 hours, depending upon where you're coming from and where people are staying in the DC area. So Shenandoah is also very easy to get to. And then if you drive what they call the whole thing, it's a much longer drive, and we'll talk about that later. Next slide. Okay, so as we talked about, there are lots of national battlefields and military parks within the DC area. Next slide. This is a scene from an event at Fort Stevens, which is part of Rock Creek Park, which we talked about a moment ago. This scene specifically shows a reenactment and a scene from, you can see the reenactment in the background, but a reenactment from the Battle of Fort Stevens. The Battle of Fort Stevens is the only battle that happened right within the Washington, D.C., right within D.C. itself. And actually, President Lincoln, who we spoke about earlier, he actually was almost shot at this battle. He was just mere feet from getting shot. Next slide. Manassas National Battlefield Park and Antietam National Battlefields. Those locations specifically highlight, for example, Manassas National Battlefield Park. At that site, the battle from September 17th in 1862 was considered the bloodiest day in American history in the fight for freedom in our American Civil War. The Antietam National Battlefield, which you see on the right, that denotes a time period in July of 1861, again, in which the two armies clashed in the middle of fields. Next slide. I'm just going to show a couple of different viewpoints so you can see some of the stunning imagery that highlights these battles. I mean, when you look at the landscape today, sometimes it can be hard to see what the battle would have looked like. And so I encourage you, if you're sending people to come and visit some of these sites, encourage them to attend a ranger-led program. On some battlefields, you can see more of what was on the landscape in the time period. And in other ones, it really helps to have a ranger bring that to life for you. And so I highly recommend that as far as your visitors are concerned and your travelers. Next slide. And in this section, we're going to head over to Shenandoah National Park. Next slide. Shenandoah National Park is an incredible park, and it's beautiful in all seasons. I've personally visited the park many times, and I have to tell you, it is stunning in the springtime with beautiful wildflowers and waterfalls, and many of those waterfalls continue on into parts of the summer. It's gorgeous in the fall when the leaves are changing colors, and you kind of have the place not completely to yourself in the wintertime, but you really have a quietness and a solace in the snow in the wintertime. And so it's a beautiful place for all seasons. Next slide. So this area is famous for the mountains overlooking the Shenandoah Valley. There's a really long trail on the East Coast called the Appalachian Trail. And again, the Blue Ridge Mountains. It's very mountainous. I'm not sure what your mountains look like in Italy, or what your geography specifically looks like. But in the United States, we have some mountains that are very round. They're generally the older mountains. And over on the West Coast, we have mountains with more jagged peaks. And so often taller because they're also younger geologically. But these mountains, these are very old mountains, and they're fairly rounded, as you can see in the pictures here. Beautiful, beautiful vistas. There are lots of places along Skyline Drive, which is about a 3.5 to 4 hour drive, 4.5 hour drive. Once you get into the park, there are tons of scenic vistas in which you can see more of the landscape and see more of the area. I would also highly recommend having your visitors stop at the visitor centers. A lot of the ranger staff there can help them learn more about how to make the most of their visit. You know, as I'm sure many of you know, visitors come to visit park sites and they may only have 2 hours or 3 hours or 4 hours or 1 hour. And so it's important to really plan carefully for what you can do within that place to have the best visit and the best experience. I agree also with what Donnie said, you know, plan as much as possible before they even get there. If you already know they're only going to have so much time, you know, does that family want to take a hike? Do they want to see a waterfall? Are they hoping to see a black bear? You know, what is it that they're hoping to see, and how can they do that in a really fun and safe and in a way that will help them maximize the amount of time that they have to spend. So, but again, ranger staff are always very helpful. And again, in all of the parks and places that I've discussed so far, really highlight the opportunities to attend ranger-led programs, especially as things are changing after COVID. Next slide. And again, you know, we've talked about some of the beautiful views related to geology. There's a ton of wildlife. As I mentioned, black bears, owls, rabbits, squirrels, just a ton of wildlife. This is one of the most wild areas within a day's drive, or really less than that of a drive from Washington, D.C. This is definitely one of your wildest places to explore. Next slide. So keep in mind when you're directing people to Shenandoah National Park that there are 4 main entrances, 4 of them. That's a lot. It depends a lot on where they're coming from. It depends a lot on what they want to do, where they want to access Skyline Drive. The park has over 500 miles of hiking trails, including 100 miles of that really long trail that I described called the Appalachian Trail. And they do have several lodges within the park. Most of the sites that we've already talked about in this presentation don't have lodges. And so you may, as you're directing visitors to come and visit those sites, lodging within local communities would be your best bet. But being able to stay in the lodges in these locations like Shenandoah in the bigger parks is a really amazing experience. You have a different experience than if you stay in a local community. When you can wake up and walk out your door of where you're staying and start to engage with the park and learn about the park right then and there, that's a different experience. That's a great experience as well. So I highly recommend that. For your visitors that aren't into staying in actual lodging, keep in mind there's some great campgrounds. I've also campground in Shenandoah National Park, as well as other national parks. And again, all you have to do is open your tent and there it is. So I highly recommend it. There are folks who really enjoy the backcountry camping, where you take your backpack and you hike in and continue to hike along a long distance and camp along the way. I've done that as well. And again, there are some amazing experiences. So keep in mind again that also gateway towns have a lot of things to offer, especially a lot of small towns in and around the park. Things fill up fast, as Donnie had said. So plan ahead. Next slide. And, you know, again, I just want to mention that Shenandoah National Park is a beautiful place. But as we talked about, in Washington, D.C., you have some beautiful places to explore nature. Shenandoah National Park is like one of the ultimate places to explore nature. So it depends a lot on what your visitors have for time in what they can explore. So just keep those things in mind. There's nature close to the city and there's nature not far from the city. So that may help you planning for your visitors. And that's it for me. We're going to transition over to Claire at this point.
Hi, I want to start off by thanking you for wanting to come to America and visit our national parks. It's really exciting to be part of this presentation. So with further ado, I'm going to get started. Like my coworkers, I want to stress planning is very important in this situation because obviously you are traveling to an area across the ocean where you may not have the opportunity to have someone to help you if you run into problems. So planning is always very important. One of the things that I want to talk about on this slide is all the different options you have. Obviously, Dana focused on the areas around DC. And so in DC, you're going to have a lot more opportunity for transportation, trains, buses, subways. However, if you are traveling outside of the DC metro area, you're going to want to, or New York for that matter, you're going to want to look into either car rentals or planning something where you're going to have that opportunity to be on a bus or work with your groups so that they have a full range of opportunities to visit the sites that they want to visit. There are a lot of major interstates between the different areas. So if you were to fly into DC, Philadelphia and New York are probably within a day's drive. If you're flying into New York, then DC and Boston are going to be relatively close. If you're going into Boston, Acadia is about 5 hours away. So there are a lot of options to choose from. One of the other things that you need to consider is weather and traffic, because if your groups are coming in different seasons, you still need to worry about possibly hurricane season or snow. So you want to make sure that the groups that you're talking to are aware of the different variations in weather. Obviously, if you are traveling to America, you're going to want to take advantage of the different cuisines that we have. So different places are known for different things. Shenandoah, as Dana had just discussed, is very well known for its blackberries. Acadia, which we'll talk about here in a minute, is very well known for its blueberries. So take advantage of the seasons in which the people are visiting, and let them know that when they visit, they're going to have an opportunity to eat things that they might not be as familiar with. Next slide. So we're looking way ahead on this. However, it's a big celebration for America. So I wanted you guys to be aware that in about 5 years, a little less than 5 years, we're going to be having a lot of events surrounding the 250th anniversary of Independence Day, which is July 4th. So that might be something that your groups or individuals might be interested in visiting. I imagine that it won't be just at Philadelphia. It might be in a lot of different areas that we're talking about this. Since the Revolutionary War is very widespread across the Northeast, I imagine that Boston will be having a lot of celebrations, as well as New York. Next slide. So Philadelphia, New York, DC, Boston are all, I would say, within about a 10-hour drive of each other, easily within a 10-hour drive, including traffic. So whichever area that you're flying into, you can easily get to each other parks. Philadelphia is well known for being a city of independence. There are tons of areas inside Philadelphia that you can visit, including the Independence National Historic Park, which obviously would be the main visit. But while you're there, within a half-an-hour trip, you could visit Valley Forge, which is where Washington was over the winter during that period of war. Edgar Allan Poe, who is a very famous author for America, actually has quite a few different areas. So depending on how interested your groups are in literature, there are a ton of national parks for a lot of different authors, Edgar Allan Poe being just one of them, but he has a site in Philadelphia, but he also has a private museum in Richmond. He's buried in Baltimore. There are a lot of different places. He was at Fort Monroe, stationed there as a soldier. So there's a lot of cross theme with Edgar Allan Poe. Hopewell Furnace is also about 30 to 45 minutes outside of the Philadelphia area. And that is more of like a living history farm. So there is a lot of variety in Philadelphia. As Dana discussed with DC, the variety, war sites, nature sites, the same can be said about Philadelphia. I'm not going to attempt to say the name of Thaddeus National Monument because I always screw it up and I'm not going to embarrass myself today. However, again, this is one of those situations where you need to plan. As far as I know, that site is still only open May to November. I believe it's the smallest of the national park sites, and it is only open on Saturdays and Sundays. So my father lives very close to Philadelphia, right next to Valley Forge, and I, for years, have been trying to get to that site to no avail because I'm always working. So definitely plan ahead. Next slide. So again, we're highlighting different parts of Philadelphia. Above, you'll see in the middle, Valley Forge. It has cabins. It's a very historic park based in, or rather the suburbs of Philadelphia. And it has a lot of nature content. Like I said earlier, my father lives in King of Prussia, which is right next door to this park. And numerous times I've gone there with him to take pictures of deer that are in the fields, as well as visiting the site in different seasons. So it doesn't matter if it's summer or spring or fall or even winter. It's a very beautiful area. And I also want to preface this by saying that I've been to the majority of national park sites that we're going to be discussing in the Northeast. So if you guys have any questions later on about logistics, please feel free to reach out to me and I can give you some more information. Next slide. So New York City, like DC, is a very urban area. So if you're flying into DC, into New York, you shouldn't have a hard time getting around. There's a very extensive bus system. The metro or subways are very easy to maneuver. However, you will want to plan ahead if using those systems of transportation so that you already are able to give the people information about the cost of the metros and the buses. So it'll make it a little bit easier for them to maneuver from site to site. I have been to the majority of these sites in New York City. One of the most important things I would stress is finding out about the Statue of Liberty, which is always a fan favorite when visiting New York, because they're going to have to arrange to take a ferry out to the site. So this is going to have a little bit more logistics, more planning, time-wise, to make sure that people are able to not have to spend a whole time in line. And also once they get there, being able to get everything seen in the amount of time that they have before they have to come back to the mainland. I believe Ellis Island and the Statue of Liberty are two separate islands. And so if I'm remembering correctly, so they will want to plan ahead to make sure that they get the correct tickets, which are separate. The entrance fees, if you have the annual pass, do not cover the ferry ride over to the Statue of Liberty. Some of the smaller sites, which I think are really interesting, I believe we may have on another slide. So if you want to go ahead and go to the next slide. As I thought, there are a number of really interesting sites that a lot of people might not think of when they're traveling to New York City. All of these are going to be relatively close. However, again, you're going to have to plan ahead, perhaps have people aware that they might have to rent a car. The subway will take you to the Statue of Liberty area and to, I believe, Hamilton Grange, and even possibly out towards General Grant's Memorial. However, places like Fire Island, which is out on Long Island, or Valkill, which is Eleanor Roosevelt's home. Vanderbilt is also near Valkill, and learning about Eleanor Roosevelt and President FDR Roosevelt are really interesting because this is during a point of time in America's history where things were really, really rough. However, we had one of the best presidents during that time period. So he really did a good job of seeing us out of crisis. Fire Island is more of a nature park. It's based right off the beach. The Fire Island Lighthouse, which you see pictured in the middle and bottom of the slide, is an amazing opportunity to go up into a lighthouse. Some places lighthouses aren't available for entering, so this one is a real treat if you're able to do that. St. Paul's Church, which is in the bottom right of your slide, is one of the oldest churches and cemeteries in the United States. And it's a very, very small site, but very historically relevant. And my daughter and I went out of our way to go and visit that site to hear a chorus sing during Christmas time. So I definitely encourage planning ahead, because a lot of parks will have special events or programming that if you plan it right, I think your visitors will really enjoy taking part in. Next slide. So the next area that we're going to be discussing is further out in New York. So as I stated earlier, if you look right below the yellow circle, you'll see the Vanderbilt Mansion and the Eleanor Roosevelt and home of Franklin Delano Roosevelt. So those sites are not terribly far from New York, but as we're moving up and out into New York, there's quite a few other really interesting sites that deal more with history rather than nature. So if you want to go to the next slide. The next slide kind of highlights the different people that you may see at our different Revolutionary War sites, as well as Dana had shown reenactors at the Civil War sites. A lot of the forts, especially in the summer, produce opportunities to see people dressed up as they would have been dressed during either the Revolutionary War period or the Civil War period. I also want to point out that these are all very family friendly areas. And so even though sometimes history and war is difficult to talk about, like Dana had pointed out, if you get into a ranger program or suggest ranger programs, the rangers are very good at introducing information in a family friendly and sensitive way. So it's definitely not an issue for families to bring children to these programs. The rangers are very well equipped to discuss the wars on different levels to make sure that the history is still discussed thoroughly, but at the same time making everything very family oriented. You want to go to the next slide? So as we move a little bit further north into the Boston area, Lexington and Concord is part of the Revolutionary War, and Lexington and Concord is a battle that was fought at the very, very beginning. One of the themes that people say in America, which I find interesting, is it's the shot heard round the world. And primarily they're discussing the information that was happening in America during this battle went all the way to England, because obviously this was the beginning of the Revolutionary War, the war for independence of America from Britain. And so when they discuss the shot heard around the world, they mean that the first shot of the war, which was held in Lexington and Concord, was heard through media, through telegraph and newspapers over in Great Britain. Underneath in the bottom is the Robert Gould Shaw Memorial, which I had the pleasure of interpreting while I was working at Boston African American in the heart of Boston. This is a ridiculously beautiful statue dedicated to Robert Gould Shaw, and him being the leading officer of the 54th, which is the first African American volunteer unit that eventually went and fought at Fort Wagner off the coast of South Carolina. And so this statue has a replica at the and I've just lost the name. St. Gaudens, up in right on the edge of Vermont, New Hampshire, Cornish, New Hampshire. So St. Gaudens was a coin maker, sculptor who, in addition to creating this Robert Gould Shaw Memorial, created a number of really breathtaking memorials to various people. And his site is quite out of the way. So if your visitors are interested in learning more about him, I would definitely talk to them about planning to go there and to the Marsh Billings site, which is about 45 minutes into Vermont. But it really is a beautiful opportunity because Vermont and New Hampshire, although very, very small states, have beautiful landscape. And so if they were planning a trip to the Northeast, I definitely would not leave Vermont and New Hampshire out of the equation, because I think that your groups would really enjoy visiting those areas. And obviously in the corner, again, another picture of Fort Stanwix. So next slide. As I was talking about earlier, being that you're traveling from an urban area where most of the airports are out into the countryside, depending on what time of the year you come, you're always going to find something interesting, whether it's the fall foliage or the beautiful views covered in snow, or the spring wildflowers and baby animals. Everything in the national parks is beautiful, even so much as to say the areas between national parks. So also keep in mind that when you're traveling from one area to another, the beauty doesn't end. There's always some historical aspect, even if it's not within the National Park Service. I'm sure that you can plan for other areas traveling from place to place. So these areas, as I discussed just a second ago, the Marsh Billings estate is up in Vermont, right across from the St. Gaudens site. If your visitors are traveling that far, they're going to go north, and they're going to be able to take advantage of all the different areas on their way there. So depending on which route they take, they may end up going past the Harriet Tubman House. You can pay your respects, as we did when we were in that area. As Dana said earlier, talking about Anacostia, the Frederick Douglass House, Frederick Douglass also lived up near the Rochester area, and he's buried in that area as well. So there are a lot of different places that you can visit in between sites. So it's not really just the destination, it's more of the journey between different destinations. Next slide. So one of the benefits to flying into the Northeast is to visit places that are what I would consider very rare. The picture in the corner of the beautiful yellow and white church is the site where Frederick Douglass and Maria Stewart and countless others that were on the side of the abolitionists spoke. This is the site of the African Meeting House, which is one of the oldest, if not the oldest, still standing African-American built churches in the country. It's a very, very moving experience to be able to stand on the same floorboards, original floorboards, as Frederick Douglass and countless others who inspired greatness leading up to the Civil War, through the Civil War, and helping millions of enslaved individuals find their freedom. And it all started here in Boston. A lot of enslaved individuals escaped up into the Beacon Hill area, either as a destination or on their way through America to Canada, and eventually some of them ended up in Europe. So in the middle picture, Faneuil Hall is also what they refer to as a cradle of liberty, or the cradle of liberty. This was the site where Samuel Adams and Paul Revere and others had meetings about independence. It's an amazing site. One of the interesting things is this site is still used to swear in citizenship for people who are becoming Americans. And so although those aren't open to the public, it's still very meaningful to be able to stand in this space that has such historical relevance. The other picture shows Seneca Falls, which is the site of a lot of women's independence speakers that came to fight for suffrage and the right to vote. And so all of these places are easily attainable to visit, especially the ones in the heart of Boston. So I definitely make sure that people are aware of all of the little sites that people may not be visiting. I refer to them as hidden gems. I was giving a talk in downtown Boston, and a little 7-year-old in a group that I was talking to questioned my term hidden gem. She wanted to know why we were hiding these sites. So definitely make sure that your groups know about them. If you want to go to the next slide. So up further north of Boston, obviously you've got Bunker Hill in the soul of Boston, but just further north, you can get to a number of amazing sites. Lowell, which is pictured here in the upper right corner, is an area where you can actually get onto a watercraft, a boat of sorts, and go through the lock. So this is a picture that was taken while my daughter and I were taking a tour of the lock. We didn't have enough room for all the pictures, but if you look to the upper right and left, there is a level area there where there were rangers that were opening the lock. They had huge wooden logs that were kind of like levers that they would push, and that would open the lock. And the whole concept of locks in this area is so interesting. So to be able to take a ride inside a lock is pretty rare. So I definitely encourage your visitors to plan for these special events and tours. Below that is Cape Cod, and Cape Cod is off the coast of Massachusetts. It's kind of hard to tell because of all of the different national parks that are in this area on this map, but there's a little hook right at the very tip of the peninsula. Thank you, Donnie. And that's where Cape Cod is located. So if you're traveling from Boston to Cape Cod, again, there are a number of areas that you can stop in little towns and you know, eat at the restaurants and visit the local areas, because that whole area of Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island is absolutely gorgeous, and all of the people are extremely friendly. So I definitely encourage you in between, you know, large national parks to visit some of those smaller parks. So if you want to go to the next slide. And I will go ahead and explain the strange child that keeps showing up in these slides. This is my daughter, who I had told you travels with me often as we move from park to park. And so this was her participating in a junior ranger program on Boston Harbor Islands. This is another part of the National Park Service that I want to boost, because a lot of people don't know, especially coming from outside of the US, about the Junior Ranger program. This is a program that is open to everyone. Age is not a factor. However, a lot of the parks do focus on, say, 4th to 5th grade level curriculum. They are mostly curriculum-based activity and educational booklets that children can use as a way to learn about the Park Service. This is an amazing opportunity to for everyone to learn about not just the history and nature, but to delve down into some of those questions that if you don't have the opportunity to take a program or special event, you'll learn a lot of history and nature-based information inside these Junior Ranger programs. And the really cool thing is they get a little plastic badge And this one's metal, of course, but the plastic badges are collector's items. There are over 400 of them in the Park Service. I wish I had been able to put a picture of the children that come through the park decked out in badges and patches. And it's really a treat for them. They get sworn in, people applaud. It's a really moving experience. So to get on with this slide, there are a huge number of things to do in Boston. I lived there for 6 months and got in most of it. But if you want to hit the highlights, the old State House, which is right across from Faneuil Hall, is an amazing opportunity. They are separate from the Park Service. They do offer tours, but you can walk around the site where the Boston Massacre happened. The Freedom Trail, the Black Heritage Trail, all of these things are free to do on your own, but I would encourage planning ahead so that if your visitors want to come to a program and have an interpreter walk them through these areas, they can. The USS Constitution is not always available. You'll see that down in the corner. However, it sometimes, I believe now, is docked near the Charlestown Navy Yard. So you could easily spend 2 weeks in Boston and not get everything done because it's just so jam-packed full of interesting history and nature. So I would definitely think about Boston as one of those major sites to visit. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So I know a lot of people are interested in Acadia National Park. It is a very well-loved park. I was blessed to be able to work there for a season. Again, very jam-packed, full of things to do, not only inside the park, but around the park. And so one of the highlights is driving to Schoodic. They have a historic, rather not a historic, but a scenic drive around the peninsula. Bass Harbor has a beautiful lighthouse. If you go up to Cadillac Mountain, you can see a spectacular view. There are many, many things to do. Whale watching tours, spending time at the beach. There is a place called Jordan Pond House that serves its famous popovers and tea. If you guys want to visit these areas, a lot of opportunity for hiking, shopping. It really is a tourist dream to be able to go to Acadia. If you want to move to the next slide. A couple of the places that I highlighted, Bubble Rock, which is a gigantic rock that literally looks like at any moment it could roll off the side of the mountain, is a very popular place to hike up to. The hike is relatively easy. I have bad knees and am definitely slightly overweight and still am able to hike most of the areas of Acadia National Park. For those of your visitors who are a little bit more athletically built and more into, you know, extreme hiking, they could do Beehive, which I did do. However, I'm afraid of heights, so keep that in mind. There are some drop-offs that are rather exciting. And also Precipice, which is definitely for those people who are very athletic and looking for some excitement. I don't think we have any photos of that hike because I hadn't actually done it. But if you're interested, please feel free to reach out to us and we can get you a spelling for Precipice and I'm sure your visitors will be very thrilled to learn about that opportunity. Great Head, again, another relatively easy hike. Beautiful vistas off to the ocean and the bay. And in the bottom middle, Jordan Pond House is looking out to the Bubble Mountains. I think they're called the Bubbles. And these two chairs are right in front of a beautiful restaurant that serves, as I stated earlier, fresh blueberries, jams, syrups, different cuisine. A lot of it's seasonal, so it's definitely something to take advantage of. If you want to move to the next slide. So this is highlighting two of the more popular areas, Cadillac Mountain, which is on the right with the beautiful sunset. This is literally where in America the sun rises and hits this spot first every day, half of the year. So what's a really interesting trivia is that there is a battle between two sites. One is Cadillac Mountain, and the other, I believe, is West Quaddy Lighthouse, which you could also visit. It's about maybe 45-minute drive north from Acadia. And these two sites are in a battle because they both claim to be the first place that the sun hits America, mainland America. And they are literally tied between 1 second. So half the year, apparently, Cadillac Mountain gets that 1 second, and the other time, West Quaddy Lighthouse gets that second. So it's kind of an interesting bit of trivia to be able to, especially if you go up on Cadillac Mountain at sunrise, to be able to say, I was standing in a spot where the first rays of the sun hit. On the other opposite side is Thunderhole. This is a very, very popular area. If you're going to plan for Thunderhole, you need to keep an eye on the weather reports. It's always interesting to visit, but if you want spectacular sounds and sights, you're going to want to go when there's bad weather, which is kind of ironic. But when a storm is rolling in, that's the best time to participate in Thunderhole. You can stand out on the edge. It's kind of fenced in for protection reasons, but very often people like to stand out on the edge, holding on to the metal fence and have the water come up and splash them. It's a real treat if you're out there at the right time. If you want to go to the next slide. So we're getting towards the end of our slide presentation. Again, we're highlighting different areas that are not as well known. The 9/11 site up in the corner, I believe, which is located in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, is probably about a 5 to 6 hour drive, either from DC, New York, a little bit further, obviously, from Boston. But a very important part of American history. So a lot of people would like to go to Shanksville and pay their respects to the people that passed during the Flight 93. In the opposite corner, I believe, is Bedford Whaling, which is very south in Massachusetts, right near Rhode Island, right off the coast. A beautiful little town. They have a whole bunch of different restaurants and museums in that area. So a lot of variety, very quaint, cozy town. Again, we're going to mention the Appalachian Trail. This is a really great map for that. As you can see, if you look at the very top of this green line that travels all the way from Katahdin, which is located in the center of Maine, all the way down through all of these states, New Hampshire, Vermont, Massachusetts, Connecticut, New York, Maryland, Delaware, New Jersey. It's I believe, if I'm correct, the trail is around 2,100 miles, and it goes all the way through the south into Georgia, and I believe it's Springer Mountain in Georgia. And so if you had 6 months and were in really good shape, again, you'd want your visitors to plan ahead. I have met many people. I worked in Shenandoah, so met many people on the Appalachian Trail that were internationally based, and they were doing the trail. So it's really exciting to run into people who have a love of nature, and that adventure to want to travel to that area. So I am done with this slide.
Claire, I think looking at time, I think I'm gonna jump in here to wrap up
Yeah,
with a
no
couple.
problem.
Yeah, with a couple of questions we have just to hit on really quick. But I want to thank Dana and Claire for a fantastic presentation. Thank you both so much. And I hope everyone got a good look and feel for some of the many parks that are in the Northeast. And you can see there's probably much more than you expected, and really fascinating and important history and culture and struggle for civil rights, for equal rights, for freedom, but also amazing landscapes and ecosystems. We've answered many questions as the presentation has gone, but I want to just, for anyone who wants to hang on, address a couple questions that just came in. Someone asked about receiving a copy of the presentation. So Leah can answer this question,
Yes,
but I know that all of
yes,
these
sure.
are posted.
Yes, the presentation is already included in the documents inside your panel. In any case, I will send you a copy within tomorrow with the mail included in the mail we normally send you. So for sure we will give them your presentation. Avrete quindi la presentazione nella mail di domani, e in ogni caso, se avete la possibilità, scaricatela subito perché è nel vostro pannello di controllo. Grazie. Okay.
Then there was a question about reservation systems. So we're referring to at Acadia National Park, there is a requirement to make a reservation to go up Cadillac Mountain. Next year, there might be reservations to go to Jordan Pond House, and there might be reservations required to drive along part of the park called the Ocean Drive. So you'll just want to check the park website early next year for the specific details, and there will be links at the website to take you to recreation.gov, which is where someone can make that reservation, and they can be a digital reservation that you would then show at the park. I'm not sure what FOC means in the question, but that's the details about that. And then there was a final question about the openness of the United States to Italy right now. I don't want to give the definitive answer because you should check with the State Department and the US Consulate and Leah at the Visit USA Association. Right now, my understanding is that the United States is still closed to visitors from the Schengen area, which would include, of course, anyone from Italy. But again, check that, look online to verify that. We don't want to get outside of our lane of information, but that's my understanding at the moment. Let's just look. Okay, wonderful. Dana and Claire, any parting words? This was such a great presentation. You all really filled in the map of the Northeast.
Thank you.
Yeah, again, I would say, again, plan ahead. That's number one. And number two, there are really opportunities for everyone to engage and explore in national parks in the Northeast US. There's a lot to see. There's a lot to do. We only touched on a portion of what there is to do. Definitely families, definitely individuals, people with various interests in history and nature and children's activities. There really is something for everyone, especially recreational opportunities. That's what I would add.
Absolutely. Okay, thank
Great.
you. Thank you all so much. And we'll be back Thursday. I think Leah's going to explain that. We'll be back with our last Park Service presentation Thursday.
Yes, thank you all of you. Thank you, Claire. Thank you, Dana. Thank you, Donald. It was really nice to hear you and to see all the beautiful pictures you proposed us. And I will give you the next appointment to 17 June at 5, because we have 1 hour later than today. Quindi vi do appuntamento alla prossima settimana, cioè a questa settimana alle 5, il 17 di giugno, con l'ultima puntata di questo percorso con gli advanced training sui national park, e sarà